Hello and welcome to Culture Shock on the Conscious Resistance. This is John Vibes, and today I'm going to talk about revolutions and specifically the myth of the two-sided revolution. In the past couple years, we have seen so-called revolutions take place pretty much all over the planet, starting with Egypt and then kind of spreading out all over the place. And even in Europe, in Greece, it's been happening almost as long. But the way that these issues are presented to us in the mainstream media are extremely deceptive. And this isn't a new thing. This can go all the way back to the revolutions of the American Revolutionary War and even further back. So basically, the way that any revolution is presented to us is that there's two sides in the struggle. It's the people versus the government. And then, when the people beat the government, there's some kind of new situation, and apparently, according to history anyway, things are better. So, looking at this, what's happened in some of these countries and what's happening in Ukraine right now, that's really not the case. And even in the American Revolutionary War, that was not the case. There was not one side versus the other, and the protesters, the people revolting, were not one unified front. They were many different people with many different ideas, many different goals and motives. Many times they did not like each other, they did not agree with each other. In Egypt, this happened, and it happened to the point where this collective, apparently, of people that demanded change and wanted something different, they more or less put a military leader into place that was from the same military that was oppressing them. And now they have kicked out three different military leaders that were running their government over the past couple years just to swap them out with a new one. So that was a completely failed revolution, even though it was presented as a success in the mainstream media. And we could even look as far back to the American Revolution. We are presented the idea that it was the colonists versus the British redcoats, and that was the end of the story. And that the colonists won, and that we, now have this system of government based on what the people wanted during that specific time. But that's not really the case. If you read the writings of somebody like Thomas Paine, who came from a completely different perspective of many of the revolutionaries that were taught about in school, you can see that the founding fathers, or as they're called, were not one unified front in American history. They had many disagreements. There were a large group, along with Thomas Paine, who were called anti-federalists, who were more or less anarchists. And then you have the federalists that we learned about in school, and they were basically the people who just wanted to put a more decentralized monarchy into place in this country that they controlled. And those are the people that we are taught are these progenitors of freedom, when that is far from the case. So now we can kind of fast forward to what's going on in Ukraine right now, and we are being presented with the idea that it's the people versus the government yet again. Yet, what has happened is things may have started out as a regular protest because things are legitimately bad over there. There's a government. Anywhere where there's a government, there's going to be problems. So, there was legitimate complaints for people to be in the street. And, of course, there was police brutality. They were doing horrible things to people. And people were unified against that, and they wanted that to change. But as far as what the change that they wanted to implement was, they were not unified in that, and they are not unified in that. So now they are going to reach a point in their revolution where once the government that they're fighting against leaves, which is happening right now, now there becomes this power struggle for all of the people that were overthrowing the government, that seemed to be a unified front, Now these people are going to be at each other's throats for the ring of power. And this is the power vacuum that a lot of the detractors of anarchists, of anarchy, put forward when somebody like myself says that there should not be a government, that government is immoral. There are a lot of people who say that there will be this power vacuum that's created if you get rid of government. And this is true to an extent, but these people that put forward this argument are definitely not correct. Because the reason why this power vacuum exists is not because there is an absence of government, but it's because people still believe in government. So when you have all of these different interests struggling for power, the reason is because the power is still there and people still believe that it's legitimate. So when these governments get overthrown, the whole nation of people who still believe in government are clamoring for a new leader and a new constitution. And typically it's somebody from the military, who ends up saying that they're down with the revolution and they kind of co-opt it, or you have a radical group who are borderline terrorists who don't really want any significant change. They just want to be the ones in charge. And these are how revolutions have played out since the dawn of time. I would be confident enough to say that there has never been a successful revolution. Many people say that the American Revolution was successful, but that's not the case if you talk to the anti-federalists. They would have said that it was a complete failure and that it was co-opted from the jump. The people in Egypt right now that are still fighting in the streets with the military police that they were apparently saved from multiple years ago when the revolution first took place, they would tell you that their revolution is a failure as well. And unfortunately, Ukraine is headed in that direction as well, because these people still believe in government, despite the fact that many of them don't want to be involved in the EU, and they are just going to allow a different gang at the throne. And it's the mentality of the throne that we really need to overcome. Getting out in the streets, I'm not going to say there's something wrong with that, but if you are going to prematurely topple a government while everybody still believes that the whole concept in general is legitimate, then you are just going to replace the oppression that you currently have with a different form of oppression. I'm sorry. So that is the main point that I wanted to drive home here, is that there is not one unified front in a revolution. That just does not happen. And the way that these issues are presented, it prevents us from really understanding why things continue to get worse, or why things just go in the same vicious cycle. This power vacuum is never discussed in terms of the belief in government, and that's what brings it about. It's always discussed as some sort of just fact of nature, and it really isn't. It is the fact that there is this throne that people are grabbing for, that people are fighting for. If the throne does not exist, then there's nothing for these people to fight at. And if people do want to be gangs and tyrants in individual situations, there's enough peaceful people around to put that situation down. So these are all things that I think are important to think about when looking at these revolutions that pop up, because typically we're led into taking one side or the other. And in most cases, we shouldn't take either side, because there's more than two options available. This people versus the government is kind of a false dichotomy when you look at history, because it's multiple groups struggling for power. And it is the people versus the government right now while the government's in place because they have the power, but in reality, it is people versus the concept of power. And that is what we need to fight, not necessarily the people who are in those positions. That's not to say that they don't need to be met with aggression at some point because they are aggressing upon us, and it may come to that breaking point. However, there is going to be no success unless we move past this mentality of power and domination. And that is the problem. So until next time, this is John Vibes at The Conscious Resistance. Peace.